it is being recorded. Okay, I am sharing my screen. All right. So how are we all doing? This is the final lecture. So we have reached the end of the semester. Very exciting. So it's been, quite the semester with the pandemic and everything, but we made it through. So you should all be proud of yourselves, right? I know I talked about this last week, but look, it's difficult to get through all of this. It's difficult to get through just a course, under normal conditions, and to do it in the middle of a pandemic is really challenging. So you should be proud of yourselves that we've reached this point. There's only a couple of hurdles left, right? So we have a paper to submit and a final to take. But I suspect you will all do well. This class did really well actually on the midterm, so I'm not too concerned about that. And we'll talk a little bit about the paper again today. So let's get started. Okay, so the paper, right? So this will be sort of the last reminder. It's going to be due on the 13th. So that is on Sunday. Yes. So by the end of the day, Sunday, you have to submit it, and you're basically just reflecting on, what you thought about those self-assessments that you took, whether you agree with them, disagree with them, what surprised you, what didn't, how you think they might impact your future, things like this. But the details you can find in the syllabus. Appendix C is where you'll find the details about that. So pretty self-explanatory. There's a format that you need to follow. And so just use the example paper that I uploaded to Blackboard to make sure you're following that format. Things like headings, making sure the title, the abstract is right, things like this. But it's mostly subjective, right? So you should all do well. There are no right and wrong answers. Okay, so any questions about the self-reflection paper? Okay, good. All right, moving right along. So the final will be on the 17th. It will be a Thursday at 3:30. You'll have an hour and 15 minutes to complete it. The format will be similar. I haven't actually created the exam yet, but the format's going to be the same as the midterm, right? So roughly the same amount of questions. Maybe you get some bonus questions at the end. It's closed book, right? So you'll do an honor pledge before you take the exam, and we're going to cover a lot more material in this exam. So we're covering chapters 8 to 16. There's a lot of content there. And to be clear, just like the first exam, the only thing I'm going to test you on are topics that I covered in my lecture. So a lot of what my lecture is about is what's covered in the textbook, but not all of it, right? So I don't cover all the content that you find in the textbook, and I do cover topics that you won't find in the textbook. So the source material that you should be studying to do well on the exam is the lectures. And to help with that process and to make sure that everyone does really well, for the technically it's the pre-recorded lecture from last week, but the pre-recorded lecture that I'm going to do will be a review of all the chapters. And, the basic idea is, there's a lot of details, right, that you'll find in each of these chapters. I don't know that it's important to remember all of the details. There are some major ideas that you need to take from this course that I think are most important. So the test will really be about making sure you understand what those sort of big ideas, those main ideas are. And so I'll cover that in the review session that I record, and you can use that to sort of guide you in what you really need to know to do really well on the exam. So hopefully providing that will focus your efforts and ensure that everyone does really well on the exam. But again, it's going to be chapters 8 to 16. So any questions about the final? Okay, good. All right, we're moving right along. So let's get into what we covered last week. Now, as I thought about, we talked about communication last week, and to be honest, I wasn't excited about the content in that chapter. I think a lot of it was somewhat simplistic. I don't know that there was a lot of value there. So I thought it might be more useful to introduce you to this approach that McKinsey uses in their communications. But as I went through how I sort of described that process, I don't know that I did such a great job. Often, I'll critique myself, every week I'll critique myself to see how well I did on my Tuesday lecture. And then my Friday lecture, they sort of get the benefit of me practicing on all of you. So I think I did a lot better in describing what this approach is for my Friday class. Although I didn't do a perfect job because the PowerPoint that I used was actually the unedited version. So I somewhat blew it on the PowerPoint on Friday. And I don't know that I did such a great job in really describing it. So I just want to take a couple of more moments during the review just to really nail down what the approach is all about. And also the irony was not lost on me that I did not do an effective job communicating an approach to communicating effectively. So that irony was not lost on me. So let's see if I can do a better job this time. But anyways, so what we talked about last week was the communication process. And the process is very simple, right? You have a sender transmitting a message to a receiver. And the goal for the sender is really to transmit that message both efficiently and effectively. You want to give all the information you need so that they fully understand it without taking any more additional time. And the McKinsey approach to communication is one way of being a very effective and efficient sender of messages. Now, the receiver is, obviously receiving the message. The goal here is you want to make sure that they understand the message. But an approach that you can take as a receiver to be a good sort of listener is this practice of active listening. And so I showed the video, and really like some of the key ideas for being good at active listening is really just sort of reflecting back to the person and maybe sort of paraphrasing or summarizing what they said to confirm in their minds that you're really understanding what they're saying, that you're paying attention, that you're engaged in the conversation. And the attitude that you want to take is a non-judgmental attitude, and this is particularly important in a teamwork setting. So this is a good way of developing quality relationships and an effective sort of dynamic within the team. You want to take, because a team member may have some ideas that you disagree with, right? And so when they offer them, though, you want to take the attitude of being non-judgmental. The approach that you want to take is an approach where you think that they're going to sort of identify maybe a blind spot in your thinking, right? They're going to reveal some useful information, new information that maybe you haven't considered that that might change your mind. So you want to go into the conversation with that sort of non-judgmental attitude, having an open mind, and approaching the conversation as if they're going to sort of clue you into something that you might have been missing in the past. And so that's an effective way of active listening. But getting to the McKinsey approach. Now, look, this is a validated method. You know, McKinsey consultants, right, are called upon by the Fortune 100, the largest companies in the world, to solve the most important problems. When a Fortune 100 company is deciding maybe to launch a new product, to enter a new market, to acquire some new company, often what they'll do is they will hire McKinsey consultants to help them answer those questions of whether they should do it or not. So McKinsey consultants are, you know, communicating with, you know, the leaders of industry. They're doing it at a very high level. So it's important that they communicate effectively. And this is the approach that they use, right? So this is something that's accepted within, you know, all of the executives of some of the top companies. So it's an effective approach. But anyway, so the basic idea here is that let's suppose you're reading a novel, a 1,000 word passage in some novel. You're not going to remember all of the little details. You're not going to remember all of the words that were written in that passage. What you'll take away from that passage, perhaps, depending on what it's about, is maybe, you know, that there was a murder, that a woman killed a man, and that the weapon used was a gun. And, right, so you're not remembering all of the details. And that's because when you consume information, your brain abstracts it, right? It organizes all the information into categories which summarize the details. And you are just memorizing those summaries, those categories. And so given the way we understand the way brains work, in order to make understanding easier, it is helpful to deliver new information already sort of prepackaged into those categories, right? And so that will save the brain from having to do the work of abstraction, right? You want to do the abstraction for the receiver. And so structuring, and so what, you know, McKinsey advocates is that you want to always structure your information. And structuring is just this idea where what you want to say is organized, where you're organizing all the elements of what you want to say into these common categories, right? And so that's going to leverage your brain's need to abstract and categorize information. So you're sort of doing the work for the receiver. And that's sort of the basic idea. And there's really like 3 steps to doing this. And then I'll just go to this graphic, which I think is a good way of, oh, let me get I'm always excited to work my laser pointer. Hold on. All right, here we go. So the first step in the McKinsey approach is, so given what we know about the way the brain processes information, right? Our goal is now to structure the messages that we want to deliver. And what that means is you want to take whatever idea that you have, right? You want to take that idea and break it up into its component parts. And the idea then needs to be a summary of these parts, right? And that's essentially what you want to do. And then each of these parts, right? So food might be the main idea. Let's say you're talking about eating or whatever, right? This is a very simple example, but if you were talking about food, you would break up food into its component parts, right? So fruit, vegetables, meat. And then you want to take each of those elements and they become an idea themselves. And you want to break them up then into its component parts. And so this will now be a summary of these elements. So the top sort of idea always needs to be a summary of the elements beneath it. And this might be, you know, some idea that you want to convince them of, and this would maybe be the supporting arguments that achieve that. And you want to structure it in this way because it's a format that is most easily understood by the receiver. So that's sort of the first step. The second step is you want to make sure all the parts that you break the main idea into meet this sort of MECE criteria, which is They have to be mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Mutually exclusive just means that the categories aren't going to overlap. If I have an apple, and I'm going to talk about an apple will only fall into this fruit category. It's not going to fall into the vegetable category, right? That makes these two categories mutually exclusive. An apple can only be a fruit. And the other is that they're collectively exhaustive. So that means all of these, this idea right here of food is made up from all of these parts. There's no parts that are left out that constitute food. And the reason why you want to do this Mises step, is because that will ensure that the logic that you use in your arguments are most robust and they're sound. And so that's sort of the main idea of this whole McKinsey approach to communication. The third step is that you always want to lead with your main recommendation, right? And so if this was about entering a new market, you want to begin the presentation with whether they should enter that market or not, right? If it's about acquiring a company, you want to lead the presentation with, yes, they should acquire the company, or no, they shouldn't acquire the company. And then you want to build up your argument. And this process can be used not just to deliver the information, but really to solidify your thinking around the idea. So as you work through the analysis that you do, this could be a format that you use by breaking each of your ideas into its component parts, right? That will help you sort of think through the analysis. So it's good for delivering effective communications, effective messages, and efficient messages. It's also a good practice for working through the analysis. So any questions on the McKinsey approach to communication? By the way, the revised slides, the edited slides I uploaded, I think I did that over the weekend. So if you downloaded the slides from last week, you might want to download them again so you have the most recent version, which I think is sort of a better version of the presentation. All right, so now let's move on to the content for this week. We are at the final chapter, chapter 16, where we are going to talk about control, and we'll talk about a strategy map, which you can use to guide what it is that you want to control and to get the whole company on board with this idea of control. We can use total quality management. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So if you recall, in the very first week, right, we defined what management is, and we broke the management process into these 4 parts. And so these are sort of the 4 functions that managers perform. And so we went over planning, right? You come up with, the strategy for the company, the plans for the company, which is the objectives that you are trying to achieve, that you organize all of the resources you need to do that. Leading is about motivating the workers to do the tasks necessary to achieve those goals. And now we're in this final sort of function of management. There's only one chapter dedicated to this function, but don't make that make you think that this is the least important. It's certainly not. In many respects, it's sort of the most important function of management. But what you're doing in this control and function is you're defining how you monitor performance, and you're comparing it against your goals, right? So you're looking at how well your company is actually doing on all of these different measures, and we'll get into what those measures are going to be. And then you compare it against what you were trying to achieve, right? What kind of goals you set out in all of your planning, and whether you're achieving those goals. And if you're not achieving them, or if you are, that's going to inform the actions that you subsequently take. So the control process, here it's broken down into 4 steps, to make it easier to understand. And what we'll do is we'll just go through each of these steps individually to really sort of drive home what this is all about. So the first step is establishing standards, and these are the performance standards, the desired performance level for any given goal. And there's lots of things that we're going to look at. Financial goals, right? So targets for a particular amount of revenue, or customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, efficiency in your processes, things like this. So you want to first establish your standards, right? That may be, look, I want a 10% increase in revenue over the next 6 months. And then the next step is you need to measure your actual performance. And you're going to obtain these measurements, usually through reports. It might be through observations. It depends what you're actually monitoring. But so if your goal is a 10% increase in revenue, right, then you're going to want to check, obviously, your revenue reports to see whether you're on target to achieving that goal. If it's about, let's say, employee engagement, there you might want to do a survey, right? And so you'll check the results of that survey, which asks employees about how engaged they are. And then you want to compare your results to the actual standards that you set. And depending on those results, right, that will determine what action you take. Now, if you're on target, or if you've met your goals, right, if you set out a goal to increase revenue by 10%, right, and you check your reports and you're at 10%, right, then you've accomplished what you set out to do. So that means whatever practices you adopted, whatever systems you implemented, they're working and they're working well. So you want to reinforce, whatever it is that's working well, that's enabling you to achieve your goals. But if you're not achieving your goals, right, then you need to figure out why and then take corrective action. And so this is a lot of what you do as a manager, right? This is, the measures which you get judged upon, right? This is, how you determine whether an organization is effective or not, whether management is effective or not, whether your employees are effective or not. And so that's why in many respects, this is probably, one of the most important sort of aspects of managing, because this is going to tell you whether you are successful or not. And so that's the steps that you take in the control process. Now, obviously, in order to do that, you need to take measurements, right? And so we'll get a little bit into that in subsequent slides. But so in order to sort of implement this control process, right, you need to establish some kind of objectives, goals that you want to achieve, and then you need to take measurements to see the degree to which you are achieving them. And whether you're achieving them or not, right, you need to implement systems to make sure that you're on target to hit whatever performance goals that you set out. And so, this is some of the most important things that you're going to do as a manager. You need to make sure that you're hitting your goals and you're hitting your targets. So you need to implement systems to ensure that that's happening. And when you're not, you're going to implement corrective actions, right? And so that's really all about, that's what the management process is all about. But there's a balance that you need to strike in order to, monitor performance, right? There is this tendency by managers to micromanage everything that's happening to ensure that you reach your targets, right? And so, in sort of the spirit of making sure everything is being performed as well as it possibly could, managers often will find themselves micromanaging and adopting processes that are just sort of way too intrusive and detract from performance in the long run. And these kinds of measures, and so there's a line that you can cross that will really sort of sabotage your ability to actually achieve your goal. So there's a balance that you need to strike. And so I want to play this video about what Amazon was considering doing at their warehouse in order to maximize the performance of their warehouse workers. And I want you to take note of some of the comments that people make when they are asked about this.
Amazon is raising some eyebrows with its latest endeavor.
The company just won patents for wristbands that would be used to track employees. Nicole Brewer's here now with more on how this idea is sparking some concerns.
Yeah, certainly some concern around this one. Amazon hasn't said if the technology was in development or currently being manufactured, but we do know the patents were published Wednesday, today, 2 years after being submitted.
We all know there's plenty of micromanaging in the workplace.
Somebody over your back, making sure that you're getting everything done.
Makes me feel like I don't have a lot of agency to make decisions.
But how would you feel if your company not only tracked your every step, but guided your every move?
I wouldn't like that.
That's the concept behind these tracking wristbands, just patented by Amazon. The company says the device, which collects data on inventory, would improve the process for fulfillment associates.
I can see the appeal of knowing exactly how work is getting done and how quickly.
Using ultrasonic pulses, the wristband would track workers' hands, using vibrations to alert them to mistakes, such as putting an item in the wrong bin.
No.
It reminds me of a choker for a dog when he's not being obedient.
Security experts also have concerns, citing the kind of personal information a wearable could collect, even unintentionally.
If you're on your break, that's your time. It's supposed to be your time.
Generally, it depends on the employer's need.
Alan Epstein, a Philadelphia employment attorney, says Amazon has the right to track employee productivity within its own factories, but says it would need to stop there. He also advises against the vibration feature.
One person may not think twice about it, another person may be very sensitive to it, and they're going to cause the employee a great emotional distress.
Yeah, I think I would feel stressed out about that. Which
may be accorded with successful litigation in the court.
At the end of the day, we're human. If they're that concerned, why don't you put it on the item?
Now, in a statement, Amazon called the speculation around the patent misguided and said the device would simply move existing equipment to associates' wrists, freeing up their hands from scanners and their eyes.
Okay, so Amazon, right, is known for this incredible level of efficiency. It's amazing that I can just place an order and within a day, get almost anything that I want. I mean, I love Amazon and they do a great job. And that's why they're such, a dominant company. But their effort to, maximize performance can go too far, right? And so this might be an example. I don't know that Amazon has adopted this device, but, they were considering having their employees wear a device that would monitor their hand movements. There's a point at which you can go too far in micromanaging employees. And one of the things that one of them said was this idea that it sort of robs you of your autonomy. And we know from our motivation chapter, right, how important it is for employees to have that sense of autonomy. This is a feature of a job that will motivate workers when they're given that autonomy. And they want to have sort of control over the things that impact their work. And if they're treated like a machine, right, they're not going to respond well to that. So it's important to strike this balance between making sure everyone's working effectively and not micromanaging them, because workers are just not going to respond well to micromanagement. So any questions on that video or comments? Any fans of Amazon? So, so the next question then obviously is, okay, so we need to monitor performance. What is it exactly that then we need to monitor? What are these measures that we are going to be taking? And So to answer that question, there was a couple of researchers that developed this thing called the Balanced Scoreboard or the Balanced Scorecard. And really what they've created, and this was, I think, originally published in Harvard Business Review. I don't know if you were all familiar with Harvard Business Review, but it is it's an academic journal. You publish research in there, but it's a practitioner oriented, right? And so a lot of like what we publish in journals is not really that accessible to practitioners. It's really designed, I think, to be read by other researchers. But what you find in Harvard Business Review is really accessible to practitioners. You don't need to be, a scientist to understand it. But it's very high quality information. It's based on the latest research. It's the results of research being conducted by the authors. And so it's a good journal to look at and to read, to review, because, they give you a lot of sort of advice on how to, run organizations, and it's really of the highest quality. Anyway, so something that you should put on your reading list or a place that you turn to when you want to know what is, the most effective practice for a particular management problem. What are the evidence-based approaches? That's where you will find it. But anyway, so within the Harvard Business Review, I think this is where this was first introduced, the Balanced Scorecard. What this is really sort of like a dashboard of what managers need to be looking at, what it is that they need to be monitoring, what they need to be controlling for. And so they developed these 4 categories as a way to sort of focus in what it is that you need to be looking at. And so the 4 categories that they developed is customer satisfaction. So you want to look at measures regarding how satisfied your customers are, internal processes, right? So the way in which you make stuff, the way in which your organization operates, all of those internal processes, internal to your company, how effective they are. So you want measures sort of looking at that. Innovation and improvement activities. You don't want to be stagnant. Great. It's great that things are working now, but you always want to be progressing toward the future. You always want to be improving upon what you're doing, right? And so, targets are just really just a starting point. And so you want measures that look at that. And then, of course, financial measures that look at how well your company is performing financially. That's probably more important than anything else, because without that financial performance, there is no company. And so this is, you can think of it as like a dashboard of measures that you always need to be checking. And so that your work should be dedicated to making sure that you're performing on all of those measures in each of these sort of 4 domains. And a strategy map is really just a visual representation of the balanced scorecard. And so I'm going to bring up, and this was in your textbook, so if you made it through the chapter, then you saw this. So this is a strategy map, what you're looking at. And again, a strategy map is just a visual representation of this sort of dashboard that they created, these researchers created. And it shows you a couple of things. So first of all, you can see the 4 categories, right? So learning and growth goals, internal process. So this was the innovation one, internal processes, customer goals, and financial goals. So it'll show you, each of the measures that you should be concerned with in each of these categories. So that's the first thing this does. So it shows you some of, what's important in each of these categories. The other thing it does is with these arrows, it shows you how one affects the other, right? So organizational culture, according to this strategy map, what they're saying is that organizational culture will have a direct impact on good corporate citizenship, right? It'll also have a direct impact on innovation, right? And employee capabilities and attitudes will have a direct impact on this, and will have a direct impact on operational improvement. So those are the 2 things that you can see from this strategy map. Now, I was very excited to see that this was a strategy map for Dr. Pepper. And that's because I know that you all see that I have my drink every week. And this is not wine. It's actually Dr. Pepper. It's actually not Dr. Pepper. It's Diet Dr. Pepper, because Dr. Pepper is going to have way too many calories. And so that's what I drink. So I'm a huge fan of Diet Dr. I drink it every day. And that's actually all I drink. But anyways, Diet Dr. Pepper, I was very excited to see that this was a strategy map for that product line. Anyways, so if you look at, let's see. So where do I want to start? So things like, so let's start at this bottom level right here, learning and growth goals, right? So this first sort of group of indicators, employee capabilities and attitudes. So these are the things that you're going to want to measure, and you're going to have performance goals, targets that you're going to set for each of these, right? So one here is reduced turnover, right? And so reduced turnover is how often you have to hire new employees because your current employees leave, right? So a business like retail, that they have very high turnover, right? And so that's one of the major issues in running a retail establishment, is constantly dealing with employee turnover. So what you might set as a target is to reduce the level of turnover, right? And so instead of having, I don't know what the turnover levels are, but instead of having 10% of your employees leave every quarter, right? Maybe you want to reduce that down to 5%. So you can set that as a goal. And then you need to implement plans, systems, and processes to prevent that from happening. And of course, we've covered a lot of these topics, right? You might want to look at things like motivation, right? How can we motivate workers to want to stay with the organization? And we went through a lot of ideas on how you might accomplish that. And so each of these sort of bullet points are items that you're going to want to monitor for, control for, and make sure that you have goals set for each of them, and that you are monitoring your organization's ability to achieve those goals. You know, good corporate citizenship here. So as an internal process goal, you want to promote calorie awareness, right? So, you know, one way you might want to achieve that is, you know, maybe through advertising. You know, you can maybe survey your customers and to see what percentage of them are aware of, let's say, low calorie alternatives to the drinks that they consume, right? And that will be sort of your baseline, right? So, you know, 35% of customers polled were aware that there's a diet alternative to their drink, right? So maybe you want to increase that awareness, right? So you want a 10% increase, right? So you want to get that up to, let's say, 45% or 50%. So you can set that as a goal, and you want to create a plan, a strategy for accomplishing it. How can we increase awareness about our low-calorie alternatives, right? I would endorse that goal. I mean, again, I am a huge fan of Diet Dr. Pepper. I don't know what kind of sorcery goes involved in me drinking that soda. It tastes just like regular soda. I mean, it tastes a little bit different, but I get all of that sugary goodness without any calories. It's like magic, right? So I'm a huge fan of diet drinks. If they can figure this out with food, like if they can come up with a diet Big Mac, like a diet hamburger, where I can consume all of that without any calories, right? I mean, that's nirvana. I don't know whether we're going to get to that point or not, but that's my goal. That's an opportunity. If you can figure that out, you'll make a lot of money in this world. You'll at least have me as a customer. Anyway, so these are, so you can see this is good to sort of give you a sense of the kinds of things that you want to attain as a manager, right? And you can organize them all. And a lot of, I mean, you'll enter a lot of companies, they just don't have sophisticated management practices in place. And one way to bring a level of sophistication to an organization is to generate something like this, a strategy map, right? Organize all of the things that you want to accomplish into each of these categories. And these are ideas of targets that you can set for the organization to shoot for, right? And so they can sort of orient your thinking about what is it that we need to improve upon so that we can perform better as an organization. So I think that that's the value that a strategy map provides. Now, here's sort of another way of thinking through. Yes, so I'm just looking at the chat. The human body is mostly made of water, right? Yours is mostly made of Diet Dr. Pepper. I think you're right. I think that's exactly, that's true because I consume it constantly. It's all I drink. I don't drink water. I don't drink juice. I drink Diet Dr. Pepper. Anyways, okay, so DEMING management. So this idea was really, well, it was introduced after the popularity of scientific management, right? Scientific management, if you remember from chapter 2, is this idea that really treats workers as like machines, right? And you're trying to figure out ways in which you can maximize productivity by analyzing just like physical movements, right? Similar to what maybe Amazon was trying to achieve with, in that video that we watched with their wrist device. And, that sort of saps the humanity out of the whole process, and workers who are humans don't respond well to that, right? And so this was sort of an alternative way of adopting a scientific approach to management that keeps the humanity in. But anyway, so the first, and so these are sort of 4 principles that you can sort of orient your management approach around in order to achieve a high level of performance. And so the first one is quality should be aimed at the needs of the consumer. And I cannot emphasize this enough. Typically if you take an entrepreneurship course, what they'll tell you, or even if you just pick up a book on entrepreneurship, what they'll tell you is that what you need to do in order to be successful, like the first step that you need to do is to write out a business plan, right? And a business plan really is all of the ideas of the entrepreneur. And the entrepreneur may not necessarily be in touch with what consumers really want. And there's a very high level of failure among new businesses. It's very difficult to start a new company. And in part because the ideas that the entrepreneur had really weren't in alignment with what customers wanted. And so there's an alternative approach called the lean startup movement. It's now become very, very popular. And the paper, I did a study on this, and that was the paper that I just published like last month, that looked at the effectiveness of this alternative approach to, instead of having entrepreneurs begin the process by writing out a business plan, which is really the ideas of and the goals of the entrepreneur rather than of potential customers. The lean startup says you got to scrap that plan and go out into the real world and start interacting with customers and figuring out whether this is something they actually want before you actually produce your product. And it's effective, right? So it's effective when your business is started based on data that you actually receive from customers and validation from actual customers that this is something that they want. And so, they recommend this process where, you start with prototypes, right? It's called the minimum viable product, right? You just get a product, it's in a prototype stage, you just get it out there to the public and see what they think about it. And they'll give you feedback, on aspects that they like and aspects that they don't like. And then you can iterate on your idea so that it better conforms to what customers actually want, right? And that's a more effective approach to starting businesses. All the businesses that I started were in response to problems I experienced as a customer, right? So the only companies that I've ever started were companies that offered products that I use as a customer, right? And so it was entirely from the customer's perspective. That's most important, because at the end of the day, the whole point of production is consumption. It's not to give people jobs, right? We mine material, not because we want to dig holes in the ground, not because we like playing around with rocks. It's because we want to create products and services that people want to consume. We should start a business. Yeah, I mean, I'm open to that. I have lots of ideas. And what I would stress is that, you know, look around the world and just your own experience as a customer. There is tremendous opportunity in this world, because there is so many flawed products and services that are offered. You know, there's so many problems with society that need to be fixed, right? We don't live in utopia, right? We don't have the ideal sort of systems. We don't have the ideal products and services. All the things that we need, right? There's so many flaws in all of it. And that's an opportunity for people to offer alternatives that solve the problems that consumers experience. I talked about a few of them, right? I mean, there's problems with the educational process. That's where a lot of my focus is on. I talked about traffic, though. It takes me an hour and a half to get to Brooklyn. Why? It's 5 minutes away, right? And that's a problem that exists everywhere. I think that that's a major thing. That's also something that I am thinking about. But anyways, I mean, any product that you consume, you think about some of the flaws in the products that you're using and ways that you can improve it. That's it. That's an opportunity. So there's enormous, because our world is so deeply flawed, it means that there's enormous economic opportunity for people who think a little bit about how you might solve, you know, some of those problems. And you don't need to start a business. I mean, starting a business is a great idea, but you don't need to start a business in order to do that. I mean, if you work at a company, that company better be committed to innovation and serving customer interests if it wants to do well. And if they hire someone like you who understands this, you may have ideas on the products that they offer, how they can better serve their customers, right? And so you can do that within existing companies. You know, there's lots of opportunity to improve what it is that we're making so that you can have an impact. It's not just, you know, starting new companies. Anyway, so you want to focus on consumer needs. That's the only thing that matters. If you're not delivering a product or service that people are willing to buy, they're going to go to the competition. And it's very simple for me to switch, you know, from, you know, eating hamburgers at McDonald's to eating hamburgers at Wendy's. I don't really eat a lot of hamburgers, by the way. It's very unhealthy. I mean, every once in a while, but that's it. It's not my favorite food. But if it was, I mean, look, if you care about your hamburger and you're getting terrible hamburgers from McDonald's, why are you going to continue to go there? You're just not. You're going to choose to go to the competition. And so in an instant, people can change. And that's, you know, the beauty of the market system that really forces companies to be responsive to consumer needs. So as a person who works in a business, you got to make sure that that's front and center on everyone's minds throughout the entire organization. This other point, improving the system, not blaming the workers. We talked a little bit about this, I think in week 2, when we talked about theory X and theory Y. So things are going wrong in your organization. The question is why. We haven't been meeting our targets. We haven't been meeting our goals. There are some managers, and we would describe them as theory X managers, who said the problem is the workers, right? We need to crack the stick a little bit harder, right? We need to punish them. What this is suggesting is that you be a theory Y manager, and instead look at the system in which they are operating, improve the system, and you will improve the results of your employees. And so that's what they advocate. I think that that is a good idea. Whenever you want to improve the workplace, you want to think about ways in which you can improve the system so that your employees perform better. And you know, this dedication to customers, this dedication to quality within your organization will lead to improved business performance, right? It's going to lead to increased market share, increased company prospects, And as your business expands, right, you get to hire more people, so increase employment. But all of this is only possible if you're relying on hard data, right? And so you want a data-driven approach to your decision-making. When we talked about decision-making, remember we talked about rational approaches and non-rational approaches. Non-rational approaches like using your intuition are valid ways of making decisions, but it's not what you want to rely on in making your decisions. That's sort of like as a last resort, an alternative when the data isn't available. The most effective way to make decisions within business is to make rational decisions, use a data-driven approach. You want to make decisions understanding what your options are and based on evidence. So you need to collect data, and that's sort of what we've been talking about. And so that's very, very important. You need to be collecting data on all of these different indicators in each of those categories in our strategy map to really understand what's going on and to see where you need to improve and whether you're improving or not. And then, of course, based on that, take adjustments as necessary. This is so if you buy into this DEMING management approach to focusing on quality and that will lead to good things, here is sort of a 4-step way of doing that. Basic idea here is, okay, so we need to improve in some area. Let's come up with an idea on how we might do that. And before we implement this idea company-wide, maybe we should do like a pilot study, right? Let's first test it out, collect data to see what effect that new idea had. And if it works, if the data suggests that it's improving performance along this indicator that you care about, right, then you implement it company-wide, right? So you want to take this sort of data-driven approach to your decision-making and to the practices that you adopt within your organization. All of this is part of what's known as total quality management. Total quality management is really just this sort of comprehensive approach where you get everyone on board within your organization that you want to continually improve the quality of what you're doing and making sure that you're serving customer interests. And so there's really 2 sort of very important features that go into total quality management. And so the first is this people orientation and the other is improvement orientation, right? So in order to maximize how well your company does and to make sure that you're dedicated to improving your organization, you want to make sure everyone is on board with this, right? That everyone understands that the goal here is we need to deliver value to customers, and you need to understand where they fit within that process, right? So they know the impact that they're having and the importance that they have within the organization. And you need to get them on board with the idea that we need to maximize whatever it is that you're doing, right? So we can best serve ultimately the customer, right? And so you want to sort of ingrain this within your organization. This is not just something that's placed in like a strategy document by upper management. This is something that everyone is on board with, right? That everyone understands, and that is a central feature of what everyone is doing. So you want to make sure, again, that everyone is on board with this. They understand, that we're serving customers here and how they fit into that process, and that you want to be dedicated to this idea of constant improvement, right? And the reason why you want to be dedicated to constant improvement, it's because it's less, so there's a few sort of reasons given here. It's less expensive to do it right the first time, right? So you don't want to clean up mistakes. Let's just do it right, right out of the gate. Also, it's better to do small improvements all the time than implementing this one grand plan to make this, enormous gain. That's much more unlikely. What's more likely, if you really want to get those big gains, then you need to take little steps along the way, because those are a lot more manageable. Accurate standards must be followed to eliminate small variations. And so you want to establish best practices, figure out what works, right? And make sure that that's what people are following. Now, and of course, be mindful of this idea that you don't want to micromanage, right? That doesn't mean you want to be staring at all of your workers, you know, and monitoring everything, every little thing that they do, and dictating every little sort of movement. You want it to be a collaborative process. You know, we talked about this in other chapters. You want to be collaborative. You want to allow them some autonomy. And, you know, even when we talked about performance review, there's sort of an approach that's to performance reviews that is very productive. And so you want to adopt those kinds of approaches when you're making sure that people are following sort of best practices and also establishing best practices. Again, it's a partnership between, you know, management and the workers. The workers have a lot of valuable information since they're doing the work, you know, day to day. So you want to value that information and see it as a partnership in trying to figure out what's the best way to do things. And there must be a strong commitment from top management, right? So ultimately, you know, the people at the top need to be on board with this. Hopefully they are. If they're not, they're terrible managers, right? And, you know, it's going to have a large negative effect on the prospects of that organization. But that does it for this chapter. That is my last slide. As the last slide of the semester. Is there any questions about any of this? I'm going to take one last sip of my Diet Dr. Pepper. So I guess that does it for the semester. Again, you know, I'll hang on for a few more minutes as we wrap up, just in case anyone has any questions. But I wish you all good luck. And again, congratulations on making it through the semester. You should be proud of your accomplishments. I suspect everyone will do well on the final. I will provide the resources to ensure that that is possible. If there's any way that I can help in the future, do not hesitate to reach out. Yeah, good luck. Maybe we'll see each other again in the future.
Thank you so much for everything, Professor.
Thank you.
What a great semester. Thank you.
Thanks. The extra, who knows what the extra credit questions will be? It might be on Dr. Pepper. We just don't know. If you get a C in the class, can I still get a nice letter of recommendation? It could be nice. But you probably want to get a letter of recommendation from a professor you did A quality work with, right? Because, but we can talk. I mean, I think that you're joking, but yeah, so if you need letters of recommendation, we can talk about that. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. A C student could get a letter of recommendation. I mean, you want to get a letter. I mean, as a strategy, you want to get a letter of recommendation from a class that you did some of your best work in, right? And I know that you can do better than being a C student. Thank you, thank you. I appreciate the compliments. Thank you. Yeah, so just as a strategy, right, they'll have a lot better things to say about you. I don't think that you are a C student, but C students can get a letter of recommendation. If that's your best option, right, then it is what it is, right? So you wanna talk to me about how we can best strategize that letter to cast what you've done in the most positive light. Of course, yes. I know that you're joking. I know that you're not a C student. The YouTube channel's coming soon. Thank you. I appreciate the compliments. Thank you. I'll let you all know. Yeah, when the YouTube channel's launched. I will. Thank you. I'll let you know. I need to stop sharing. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Thank you. You too. Yeah, have a great night, everyone.